Over the years, I've ridden quite literally hundreds of different mountain bikes and components. And as a result, I've ended up adding some particular ones to my collection, ones that I feel are quite relevant and important. Like this Norco Shinobi, which is actually about 10 years old, and somehow it's still relevant. But before we delve in too deeply with this, let's set the scene a bit. Now, as you may well know, 26-inch wheels and tyres are really where mountain biking started, and it was 26 for a very long time. Now, this wasn't because it was a bespoke size, it already existed, and it was a more suitable method of having a wheel that's going to be strong, light, robust, etc. for mountain biking, rather than 700C, which was the road size at the time. But for a long time, different designers experimented with varying different wheel sizes, even 650Bs. But it was British designer Jeff Apps that actually discovered a set of Nokian tyres. I forget the name, but they were pretty much a snow and ice tyre. And they were 700 by 45, which I think is about a 28 by 1.25, or near enough, a very slim 29-inch off-road tyre. Now, he was in touch with Charlie Kelly and Gary Fisher, who started the Mountain Bikes brand, and essentially they hit it off, and Jeff sent them a set of those tyres. And when they tried them, I think they were universally just blown away by what the bigger wheels could do. And they initially started experimenting. Now, Gary was absolutely sold on their ability early on. He was a bit of a visionary, really. He could understand the potential in anything in mountain biking, be that products, be it wheel sizes, be it different geometry. Gary Fisher really was ahead of his time in every respect. Now, it was Gary, alongside a few other designers, admittedly, but it's Gary that really pushed WTB to make the first proper mountain bike tyre. Now, that was called the Nanoraptor, and that came in a 29 by 2.0. 29ers first surfaced in the late 90s, and they were kind of pushed by the underground and to a degree kind of laughed at by the mass market, who dubbed them as like off-road road bikes and unsuitable for use and not necessary and all the rest of the stuff. But it was when Gary Fisher actually launched some dedicated 29er mountain bikes, the Mount Tam and the Pro Caliber, this is the bikes on screen, in his 2002 range, that people started perking up a bit. And then quickly in 2003 he had the Sugar 290, so it was a 290 version of their Sugar full suspension bike. It was quite a popular platform at the time. That really did show what the capability was for the bigger wheel size, but still people didn't quite latch onto it. A few cross-country racers started understanding the concept of the bigger wheels simply going to roll faster, and as technology came on, the tyres got lighter, the wheels got lighter, and it started becoming more applicable to have 29-inch wheel bikes. Okay, so let's have a look at some of those earlier 29-inch XC bikes. I'm just going to flash through them here just so you get the point. A quick look at the Norco again. There you go, you see the Norco on screen. It looks quite long, it looks fairly slack, it's got a bit of room on it, and you can tell it's got a big burly fork on it and a bit less travel on the rear. First up, Giant XTC. This is it on screen. A very admirable cross-country bike back then, but very different. Bearing in mind it was out the same year as the Norco. Next up, BMC Team Light. Then we're going to go, there's a Kona on screen there, the same thing. Toe overlap, extremely steep head angle on them. Trek Superfly, again a really nice looking bike, but very different from what was going on in the 26-inch world. Even Breezer, one of the originators of the mountain bike, look how steep that head angle is. It's more like a dirt road bike than it is what was going on in the 26-inch world. Specialised, they made a 4-inch Travel XC 29er, but it was nothing like what the Norco was. The Norco really was a very different bike. And actually, I feel a bit of a shame that they didn't push it and they didn't pursue it too hard, because actually, it was a really quite an important bike. Now, the Shinobi dates back to 2010, and that's when I first saw one of these things and first slung my leg over one. Now, I was at a press camp for a different model of bike by Norco, which was a 26-inch wheel bike. And I had one of these propped up at the back of the room, kind of not really having any attention. I think they'd left it there deliberately. They weren't that interested in pushing it at the time because of the fact that the jump to 29 was a big thing and people just weren't going, other than the XC enthusiasts that were really starting to see the benefit of the bigger wheels being able to roll over stuff. It meant they could have super lightweight hardtail bikes and still have the benefit of that rolling capability. As a result, no one really paid attention to this bike. But actually the bike was so much more forward thinking than anyone realised at the time, and I still think people don't realise now. Okay, so let's look at some of the standout features of this bike and why it was so important. First up, it's 120mm travel out back with a 140 front. Now at the time, most other 29ers were running hardtails, very race orientated, and they were running 80 or 100mm travel forks. This 140, 120 was a bruiser straight out. Now it runs the ART system, that's Norco's proprietary rear suspension system based around the 4-bar linkage. So it's a very active rear end. And the whole thing with the ART system is it's very plush and very responsive to small bumps. So very grippy, very active the whole time. Now one of the problems you tended to see with early 29ers was the room to incorporate the suspension travel out back, which is why you see this curved seat tube design. The only problem with that means there's no sort of seat stay bridge here. And the problem with that, of course, is the fact it's going to be flexible. And that is something that the Shinobi 100% is not. I get around this by having a brace on the front of the seat tube here. So unlike some lighter weight bikes that lack this, it's got a bit of meat here. So that back end is really, really stiff. There's also a one-piece rocker welded down the middle here, running that Fox RP23 high volume shock on there. I've got to say, it still feels quite plush today. It's quite surprising. And of course, it's going to be responsive as well with that low main pivot and the horse linkage on the back there. Now out back is something particularly interesting. Bearing in mind that at the time, most mountain bikes were running 135mm rear ends. On occasion, you'd see the 135 Maxwell. This has got a 142 back end on it, and it's the X12 system by Sinte. So it's a bolt-through system, but it's actually got a few cool things up its sleeve. One of which is the breakaway bolt design of the rear derailleur hanger. Now this is really quite smart. Now normal hangers bolt onto the frame, they bend, you can replace them, that sort of thing. These are a little bit different. It's actually the bolt that's designed to shear if you smash your rear derailleur. Now you might be thinking, well, how'd you get that bolt out if it does shear? Well, it's got a 3mm internal bore, really smart design. So even with the head gone, you just use your 3mm and you wind it out. And now you might be thinking, well, where'd you get a replacement bolt? Well, they keep one on the frame right down here. So if that happens out on the trail, if you're riding the bike in the way that this should be ridden and that happens, you can get around that. I think that's a really, really cool feature. And I actually think more bikes should have a feature like that on them today. I really rate the X12 system. Of course, these days we're up to boost 148, which gives a bit more bottom bracket room. But to be fair, this is pretty spacious down here. There's a lot of mud clearance. This is a 2.25 rear tyre. It's running a 1x on here. I think I had a double when I first rode it, and then I converted it to a 1x, and I've had a chain guide on it as well, because it has ISCG05 chain guide mounts. I think that's very telling of what this bike was for. And another feature the bike had is cable routing for a dropper post. Back then in 2010, 11 and 12, you didn't really have internal stuff. It was all this external hose, and this is one of those original RockShox Reverb seat posts. But the cable routing is really neat, really tidy on the external of the frame, just like the external cable routing that runs on the down tube there. Really nice to follow, and to be honest, it looks great and it functions. I almost can't floor the bike now. Now angles is something quite interesting as well. It's got a 74-degree seat angle, which isn't uncommon these days. Granted, things have got slightly steeper, but it's definitely up there with modernised frames. On the front, you've got a 68.5-degree head angle. Now, whilst this might sound quite steep to you, it's more where cross-country bikes have got to now. At the time, cross-country bikes were 70, sometimes steeper than that. So this was actually quite a slack design and very, very revolutionary. Also running a very short stack head tube on there, and it's ready for a tapered steerer tube. Lots of different crammed in features for a different sort of bike that just didn't exist at the time. Now there are some sort of drawbacks to a bike like this. At the time there wasn't a very good selection of stiff enough wheels available, and there were barely any tyres. Something of note that this bike came with, which is quite nice, is it has a set of WTB Bronson tyres on there. Now, they didn't work particularly well locally for me in the mud, so I ended up changing those tyres. But the cool thing about the WTB 29er tyres on here is it's a little bit of a nod to the very first set of WTB 29-inch tyres, which were the first 29-inch tyres available specifically for a mountain bike, and they were called the Nano Raptor. They're available just in the 29 by 2-inch. And that really is thanks to Gary Fisher really pushing them to make that tyre, and then accordingly, the industry followed, making other products. On this bike, I've got a set of Crossmax ST wheels by Mavic. Now at the time, I tell you, there was barely anything available with a wide rim. These have got 19mm internal rim width, which is tiny. And given how stiff the frame is, it was really hard to get stability on the tyres. Now I'm running a set of Maxxis UST tyres on here. It's got Minion DHF on the front in a 2.5 and an Ardent in a 2.25 on the rear. Now note the fact that they say UST tubeless on them. They don't make these tyres anymore. The UST tubeless was licensed in accordance with Mavic, who developed the system back in the day, which these wheels feature. That is the true system for tubeless. It's a pretty cool design looking at it, but kind of laughable looking at those tiny rims now. You think you wouldn't have rims that thin on a cross-country bike. And in fact, my cross-country bike's got 28mm rims, but nonetheless, pretty cool. So you've got 24 spokes on the front, 20 on the rear. There's Zycryl spokes. And you might notice it's got a two-cross design on the non-drive side on the rear. It's got a radial design. That's to basically keep them stiff under braking and stiff under power transfer, considering how minimal and light they are. They're pretty stiff, to be fair, but nothing by today's standards. I mean, there's not many other standout features worth talking about on the bike. I've obviously mentioned that RockShox reverb dropper post. I think that might be a 100mm drop, actually, one of the earlier ones. They later went 125, 150, and then all the way up to 175 now. It's got a 780mm Crank Brothers handlebar on there, a 50mm Renthal stem. It's got a pair of SDG lock-on grips with MBUK custom collars. Of course, this was a bike I had when I worked at MBUK magazine. And a bit of a mismatched drivetrain. It was like a test bench bike. You know, I had the frame and fork set up to test other people's products on. The fork's interesting though. So it's a Fox. It's obviously the Kashima coated 34, 140mm travel. It's got the fit system in there, so it's not a bad fork by all accounts, although again, nothing by the standard of today's forks. The small bump sensitivity on this at the time was incredible, but almost laughable compared to the 36 I've got on my nuke-proof reactor today. You also might notice it's non-boost, so that's 100mm spacing at the front rather than the 110 that you get on today's forks. Again, it looks spindly, it just looks out of place, and as a result, the whole combination of things makes the bike look very short, tall and steep, but actually it's not. And we're going to have a little bit of a comparison with some of that geometry as well. This is where things get interesting. Now, I'll say it again, the Norco Shinobi, this one is basically the same geometry as the 2010 model, so it's a decade old, nothing has changed on it. And I'm going to put this directly against a brand new Pivot, a 2020 model bike. This is the Pivot Trail 429, gorgeous looking bike. I mean, look at the thing, it looks so fast, it's such a lovely looking bike. And I'm not comparing them in terms of the modern quality. The Pivot is leagues ahead. It's got all the modern standards on it. It's a much stiffer, much more applicable bike. However, on screen now is a super loose chart. So wheel travel, the Norco Shinobi, 120 on the rear, 140 on the front. It's the same on the Pivot. Top tube on the Norco Shinobi, these are horizontal measurements for both, 650 versus 660. This is in the same extra large frame size, by the way. Seat tube, 533 versus 497. Of course, the more modern bikes do have a shorter seat tube to accommodate a bigger dropper post in there, but that was so far ahead, and that's only really just happened. Now this is where it gets interesting. The head tube 120 and 119, so very similar there. Chainstay length 453 versus 429. Now I've always liked a longer chainstay, especially on a bigger bike. Some people will always tell you they prefer a shorter chainstay. I do think this is preference, but I do think slightly more length in the chainstay is slightly better, especially on bigger bikes. Wheelbase, not too dissimilar, 1201 and 1211. Very similar, 10 years apart, remember here. Reach 466, okay, admittedly, it's not the biggest bike, but nothing was back then. Now the Pivot, this is a brand new bike, and the Reach is 480, so that's not that big, you know, it's a good size, don't get me wrong, but it's not crazy. It's not like my nuke-proof reactor in the same equivalent size. That's 515, that's a massive bike by comparison. But just to say, you know, there's only like 14mm in that. It's not a lot of difference. And then BB height 335 versus 343. So the Shinobi was actually a lower BB, which is one of the things I loved about riding a bike. It felt slammed, it was so good in the corners. Head angle 68 versus 67.3. Yeah, okay, we've come back slightly, and of course the offset and the other things will have changed. And don't get me wrong, the newer bike is a much better bike. It's going to have super boost or boost on the rear, it's going to have boost on the front, it's going to be stiffer, the suspension is going to work leagues better. But a decade old, and it's not that far off the mark. Now that doesn't mean to say that some modern bikes aren't that good, it just means that this one was a bit of a blue flame special. It really did come out of nowhere. They didn't really know what to do with it at the time, and it was kind of held back, I guess, by componentry. Now that things have moved on though, it's really exciting to see where Norco are. Look at some of their latest bikes with the incredibly steep seat angles on them, very relaxed head angles and extremely aggressive geometry. Really quite interesting bikes. Now we're going to be making a few more videos along these lines on GMBN Tech. The next one is another bike that I've managed to drag out the loft, and that really is the bike that's responsible for the change to modern geometry as we know it. So keep an eye out for that one on GMBN Tech in the coming days and weeks. Not quite sure when it's going to get together because I'm making that one myself as well. If you love this video and you love the styling of it, I'd love to hear from you. Any feedback is great as always. And as always, hit that subscribe button and well, over and out.